Making sense of sensory processing. So what is sensory processing? It's the way that our brain takes in information from our senses, so touch, sound, sight, taste, smell, movement, and body awareness, and it produces a response. It helps us to understand and respond to the world around us. An important note is that everyone processes sensory input differently. So I added this picture to the right just for further understanding. This is what we call our sensory processing cycle. We first start by taking in the information around us through one of our sensory receptors. That information then goes into our brains where we process it. We figure out what is going on and what we think of it, and if it's a threat or if it's safe, and then we produce a response. An important note is that our responses are heavily influenced by previous experiences and context. So I want to give you guys a little bit of an example of the sensory processing cycle. So we're going to pretend that we're sitting at a library and we hear a loud crash. The sensory receptors in our ear, the auditory system, pick up that sound. The information then goes to our brain. We process it. We figure out that it was a loud crash and that it was very surprising and we didn't like it. So we now produce a response where we might jump or we might run away. From previous experiences, maybe we've heard a loud crash that sounded similar to what we heard in the library when we dropped our favorite glass plate on the ground and it shattered, and it made us feel scared and upset. Also, we know from previous experience when we're in a library that loud crashes do not normally happen. So it's definitely a very surprising thing to happen and typical of an individual to kind of have that jumping response. So I'm going to go through our senses. We have 8 of them, 5 of them mostly everybody knows. So we'll go through touch. We have this processes through receptors in our skin, and it helps us to feel texture, temperature, pain, and pressure. We also have taste. We process this through receptors on our tongue, and it helps us to enjoy flavors like sweet, salty, sour, and bitter. And then we have smell, where we process through receptors in our nose, and it helps us to recognize scents and odors. Then we have see. We process through receptors in our eyes. It helps us to see colors, shapes, and movements. And then we have hear. It processes through our ears, and it helps us to notice sounds, voices, and music. And then we have 3 more senses that are a little less known, and these are also internal inside our body. So we have proprioception. This processes through receptors in our muscles and our joints. It helps us to know where our body parts are and how they move. And an important note of the proprioception system is that when we target this, it's our naturally calming sense. And then we have vestibular, and we process these through receptors in our inner ears. It helps with balance and knowing where our head is in space. A lot of the vestibular, when we talk about the vestibular system, it's usually some common activities are spinning. So when we spin, we get that dizziness feeling. That's because of our vestibular system. Some individuals really love to spin and they like the feeling of dizziness, while others were avoidant to it. And then lastly, this is our newer sense that is just recently came about, and it's interoception, and this processes through receptors in our organs, so kidneys, lungs, heart, brain, etc. And it helps us to identify internal body needs like hunger, thirst, toileting. It's also directly tied to our emotions as well. All right, so now I'm going to move on to sensory processing challenges. So sensory processing challenges are when we have difficulty adapting and responding to sensory input in daily life. It's like a traffic jam in our brain. This is typically when children have difficulties processing an adaptive response. So the definition of an adaptive response is how a child's brain and body successfully react to sensory input in a way that helps them to meet the demands of a situation. So when I gave you guys that example of the library, it's usually typical of us to kind of have that jumping reaction to that loud or unexpected noise, and that's typically an adaptive response. But another example may be that we feel a fly land on our arm. And we look at it, we see it, we know it's on our arm, we just kind of shoo it away. For kiddos who have difficulties producing an adaptive response, they may have react too strongly. Those are our over-responsive kiddos, or not strongly enough. So I added the same picture again. I want to go through an example of the cycle of sensory processing with a kiddo that may have difficulties processing sensory input. So for example, we put on our favorite shirt in the morning and we feel the tag, it's itching us. We process it. We feel that it does not feel awesome on us. And we might produce a response of breathing heavily, becoming distressed, and just wanting to rip our shirt off. We don't like it on our body. We want it off immediately, and we see that distress and that overwhelm and anxiety. For kiddos that produce an adaptive response in this specific situation, they may feel it, they may itch, where the tag is, they may move their shoulders a little bit, but they're able to kind of work through it and just continue on with their day. Usually when kiddos have that traffic jam in their brain, it stops them from being able to do the things that they want to do. So some functional implications of sensory processing challenges, we have attention and focus. Attention and focus are very imperative for learning and also ensuring safety awareness. It affects our learning. So our biggest thing that I always say is that if a child or individual is not in a regulated state, they're unable to be able to learn and receive the information given to them, be receptive to that information, and then also we see a decrease in generalization of skills. So if we're trying to teach something to a kiddo who's actively producing a response to any sensory input around them, what I'm saying, what I'm teaching them is not being taken in. So we always want to make sure that our kiddos are regulated before we do any type of learning. Emotions. Sensory processing definitely affects emotions. They're directly tied together. So if there is a sensory processing challenge, the child more than likely has difficulties with emotions. The sensory processing system is our nervous system, right? So if we have a heightened nervous system, we're going to have heightened emotions as well. And then it affects our self-care. So being able to do our daily self-care tasks like brushing teeth, dressing, eating, toileting. It affects our sleep as well, our quantity and quality of sleep. If we're unable to wind down at the end of the night and we have all of this energy and we try to go to sleep, chances are we're probably not going to be going to sleep at a normal time, and then therefore it impacts us when we wake up in the morning. We're probably feeling tired and we have difficulties getting going again. It affects social skills, so being able to interact with others, create friendships, navigate social situations, and just attending in joint and shared play. So if a kiddo is playing with us and we have difficulties with regulation, we're more than likely not participating in the activities or engaging with that peer. It affects transitioning, so transitioning between environments, leaving fun places, leaving the house, and activities as well. And then also engagement in community places. So being able to go to the grocery store, being able to go to the park or school. And then one important thing that I like to know is that sensory processing difficulties are not bad, but rather they're just a child's way of showing us that they need support to feel safe and regulated. So when I talk about sensory processing a lot with my families, I like to break it down into this type of metaphor about a coffee cup or a mug. So it's very similar to like the cups that we fill in the morning. If we have too little liquid in our coffee cup or tea cup, we're not going to feel satisfied. We're going to want more. It didn't wake us up. We are still tired. We just are craving more coffee in our cup. With too much liquid, we're overflowing. Coffee is spilling everywhere. We're upset. We have to now clean up that mess. Same thing with sensory input. Children need the just right amount for their nervous system to feel balanced. And it's also important to know that not every child has the same right amount as another. What is regulating for one child may be dysregulating for another. And also, not all sensory experiences and input are the same. So each person has a different way of processing input. So it's important that we trial and investigate for each individual to identify what works for them. And then a child may have a small cup or a big cup. And I'll kind of go in further about the big cup and small cup too as I continue on.